It's great to have on the show for the first time today David Hogg, co-founder of March for Our Lives and Leaders We Deserve, recently elected as a vice chair of the DNC at a very interesting time to be in that position. David, great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, David. You have a great name.
So, you've stirred up some controversy with your $20 million plan to primary incumbent Democrats. I believe with the goal of making room for younger and or more progressive officials. I mean, I think I want to start there. Are these two goals that are being connected? Is the goal one and the same, age and further to the left? Like what's your goal here?
My goal is to get Democrats back into the majority. And we have a two-pronged approach at how we do that. We have three things that we do at Leaders We Deserve. We work in primaries to help elect young Democrats to state legislatures and Congress. And we also work, and what's not breaking through in a lot of these stories is the work that we are also doing to support Democrats that are running in critical purple districts to help Democrats get the majority, whether it's in a state legislature or in Congress. Last cycle, we did this, spending millions of dollars to support young Democrats that helped to break the majority in Virginia, where we supported the frontline candidate there, and break the supermajority in North Carolina. And we did that work in frontline districts around the country as well last cycle. So there's a bit more nuance than saying it's just to challenge incumbent Democrats. Unfortunately, the media likes to run with whatever the most sensational story is, obviously. And the work here, I wouldn't say it's in some districts, it's to make sure we want to make sure that our candidates are as supportive of their constituents as possible, and we want them to win, to be clear, right? In some districts, there's going to be a candidate that's going to need to be a little bit more moderate than a candidate that's in a super safe seat.
Right.
That's a very blue seat. And what I want to make sure across the board, though, for all of our candidates, of course, they're going to be younger people. But by the way, we are not just challenging older people. There are older people who are great. There are younger people who suck and vice versa. Unfortunately, it's not like you get above a certain age and like you just all of a sudden become terrible at your job. It's not that simple. What we're doing here is trying to, it's not out with the old and in with the new. It is out with the ineffective and in with the effective. And the work that we're doing with that $20 million, some of it is going to be challenging incumbent Democrats in safe seats that in no way, shape, or form risk us losing the House, and helping our candidates that are younger that are running in frontline seats, where they're going to be the Democratic nominee, or there's a Republican that's there for us to challenge to support them. What I'll tell you that we're not going to do, though, is we're not going to look at a candidate that's in a D+3 seat and say, all right, you know what we're going to do? We're going to primary this person and potentially risk us losing the House. That is not what we are doing here, and that's part of what's not being communicated. And the reason why we believe this is necessary is because right now in the Democratic generic ballot, we typically need to have about a 2 to 3 point lead in that in order to take back the House. Right now, we have around 1% or less of a lead. That is not enough in order for us to win the House. And right now, we have a 27% approval rating. People feel like Democrats are not fighting nearly hard enough for them. And a lot of our members of Congress, frankly, are asleep at the wheel and failing to meet this moment. And what we're trying to do with this initiative is either get them to act more, to be more effective, to stand up against Donald Trump's agenda, go out there and fight in the way that Senator Van Hollen is, in the way that even Cory Booker has giving that speech, or AOC is, or people like Maxwell Frost and others. Showing up and fighting and not just saying, oh, we're in the minority, we can't do anything about this, but showing our base that we're a group to vote for. We're not just here to vote against Donald Trump. We need people to vote for us because we have a vision. And right now, we are really lacking that. And I know that this obviously can upset people, but I know the consequences of what happens. My generation knows the consequences of what happens when we have politicians that get too comfortable in their power and not focusing on the issues that matter and fighting back against groups like the NRA, Donald Trump, or others. And that's what we're trying to do here is build the strongest Democratic Party possible,
Yeah.
not only in our safer seats, but also to help us win frontline seats as well.
So I want to talk about the consequences a little bit. One thing I do like about your framework is, I've talked for a long time with my audience who says, oh, but back when it was Joe Manchin, right? It was, oh, we've got to do everything we can to primary Joe Manchin. Right. So that then he loses to a Republican in West Virginia.
Right.
That doesn't seem strategically smart. And
No.
what I like from what I've heard from you here and what I read preparing for our interview is that you seem focused on getting power back. You need power to make policy. You need policy to make people's lives better. Awesome. That's all excellent. Now, there are some who say your campaign could cost Democrats the House in 2026. Now, you're saying the opposite. You're saying, no, 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 we're not going to do the things that would actually lose seats. We will only engage when we can win seats. So I want to ask you maybe a more philosophical question, which is, in your mind, the way you see the Democratic Party right now and the state of play, in general, is it an acceptable price to pay to lose power if you are making the right political point? As an individual, do you think that that's an acceptable trade to make? Or does the number one priority need to be seize as much power as possible by winning as many seats by any means necessary?
We need to win as many seats as necessary as possible. And look, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of our candidates that are more moderate or in moderate districts like a Joe Manchin. But I understand we need to have power in order to do anything, obviously. And what I am very concerned about right now is that the American people do not feel like we're fighting nearly hard enough for them back against Donald Trump, even though we have seen him disappear people, even though we have seen him wreck the stock market with his reckless acts around tariffs, for example, even though we've seen him disappear students as well. We still see that Republicans are having higher approval ratings than Democrats on the economy and so much more. And that is an indictment of the Democratic Party. And people say all the time, it's just the messaging. It's just the messaging. Sometimes it's not just the messaging. Sometimes it's the actors. You can have the best script possible. You can have Shakespeare write a script for all I care. If you have bad actors, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. You need people that are able to meet this moment that people feel like are fighting for them. And I would also say, imagine what would happen right now if we didn't have AOC, if we didn't have Cory Booker, if we didn't have Ro Khanna or Eric Swalwell. All of those people got to the positions that they're in, including Hakeem Jeffries as well, by the way, by challenging Democratic incumbents. Granted, they were predominantly in safer seats, obviously, and that is what we're trying to do. We are not trying to challenge candidates that are in frontline seats that could risk us losing the House. As much as I may disagree with some of those candidates, I understand sometimes people need to have different policy positions than I agree with to be in those seats, because not everybody, are progressive people in this country. But we are in a moment of crisis right now. And what I believe that we're facing is, if we do not raise our approval rating by showing people how we are fighting for them and getting better people elected in a lot of our safer seats, we faced a very real possibility of not being able to win the House back because our approvals are so low and we're doing so bad on the generic ballot.
Right now, Ken Martin, the DNC chair, opposes at least some of what you are doing. How much resistance are you seeing internally to what you're doing? And do you even care about that?
Look, there's certainly some. There's no argument about that. However, look, I was elected to this position to help win back young people and help us win back majorities. That is what I'm trying to do with this. That's why I'm not going and challenging people that are in purple districts that could cost us the House. What I am very concerned about right now, though, is across the board, we all know and acknowledge that there's a problem with our 27% approval rating, especially when Donald Trump is being so reckless and it remains that low.
Yep.
We also acknowledge there's a problem with the drops in voter turnout that we've had for us of young people and people of basically every demographic, except predominantly the older people in our country and the highly educated people in our country. What scares me is there is no plan to successfully address that out there at all, including by all the purported experts that are criticizing me for doing this, which, by the way, had $2 billion last election cycle in order to win and still lost, right? And with this, what we're trying to do is address our brand problem in the Democratic Party. I don't think it's healthy for our democracy or healthy for our party to allow this culture of complacency to continue, where people think, well, I can just continue to be in a seat for 30 years, or I can just continue to be in a seat as an incumbent and not face any challenge whatsoever because I'm just not going to be held accountable because I'm not in a seat that could decide the House. I don't think that's good for the Democratic Party. And look, if you are effective and your constituents believe in you and see that you're fighting for them, you don't have anything to be worried about here if you are meeting that moment. But the fact of the matter is there are an incredible amount of amazing young people who are ready to meet this moment and are ready to fight right now, that are going to help us build a vision for the future of the Democratic Party. And what concerns me as well for the long term, yes, we have to win back the House, obviously, but what really concerns me for the long term is the drops in institutional knowledge that we're having when we have members that are in office that are not mentoring the next generation a lot of the time, which are literally passing away in office, not to mention the fact, and this is uncomfortable to talk about, but there was an incredibly important vote that we had on Medicaid that we lost because two of our members unfortunately passed away while in office. That is a threat. We can't rely on a future where the governor of Texas, for example, may be able to decide when an election is. And as a result, when we get a majority back because it's a safer seat, that's crazy. And we need to have a bigger bench for the future of our party. And we need younger people that are on the front lines of so many of these issues, that have lived through the student debt crisis, that have lived through the housing crisis, that have lived through the era of school shootings,
Yeah.
and so much more, so that they can provide a proactive vision for our party that people can buy into. That's not just saying, oh, we're not Donald Trump, because that is not enough.
No, that's clearly not enough. I'm curious your thoughts on, for example, something as specific as taking corporate money as part of one's campaign. Some say, oh, it's just a sign of corruption. You're taking money. These are quid pro quos. It's overt corruption. A different perspective is it's kind of weakness. It's not necessarily corruption, but it's weakness in the I don't know that I can win without taking that money. And therefore, maybe we need candidates who just feel as though they're able to win without that money. Do you see the corporate money as a corruption issue, as a weakness issue, or some combination of both, something else altogether?
I think it creates major trust issues with our base, especially younger people in particular. I also think if you look at the data, candidates who do not take corporate money and actively talk about it end up raising significantly more than candidates who do, because voters want to know that you represent them. Right now, we have a major issue, especially in states like Florida, where the fastest growing political party in our country is no party affiliation at all. Because people walk in, and when they're registering to vote, a lot of the time, regardless of whether or not this is the right thing to do or not, they think to themselves, well, both parties are corrupt in different ways, and I don't really feel like I can identify with each of them, even if they ideologically, and we know this from ballot measures in Florida, for example, that pass consistently with over 50% support that are progressive, they still don't identify as Democrats. And for me, with our candidates that we're supporting, our younger people, we believe it is essential to create mass campaign finance reform. And for our candidates, they don't take corporate money, so that we can show young people that there is a segment of our party that represents them, that is not, potentially corrupted by special interests, that are also those same special interests that I would argue in many ways are responsible for the collapse of the American dream for our young people, that is resulting in them losing faith in their democracy. I think part of our challenge that we're facing right now as a country is that we say, as a party in particular, we say over and over again, democracy is so important. Democracy is so important. And I agree it is. Democracy has to be used to exert the will of the people, though. And what we're failing to acknowledge right now is that we're saying democracy is so important and we must preserve it, without acknowledging the fact that this is the same democracy that has put kids through school shootings. It is the same democracy that has resulted in them, graduating into the student debt crisis, that is resulting in them in the climate crisis, and in the housing crisis, and so many other crises of our time, where the answer for Democrats, in my view, is not to say we must protect and preserve democracy, although of course we do. The way to do that is to show how we are actively using democracy to combat the special interests that are responsible for the increasing collapse of the American dream, that is resulting in the collapse of trust in our party and the future of our country in particular by our young people. And that's why our candidates, they don't take corporate money. That's why Leaders We Deserve is supported predominantly by smaller dollar donors around the country, so that people can know when they vote for our candidates that they're there to represent them, that they're there to represent the future, and creating policies that they will actually live to see the results of in the first place.
David, last thing I want to ask you about. There are some sort of rules of thumb that are sometimes applied, either intelligently or not, to national campaigns. Now, as you're pointing out, the candidates that make the most sense might be different in a purple district versus in a bluer district. Fine. But there's certain maxims that we hear often, like, for example, as important as gun safety regulations are, we've seen that when Democrats run nationally on that, it tends to hurt because it doesn't mobilize new voters in favor, but it might mobilize voters against to come out and say, I don't like that. That's one example. I'll give you another example. Now it's become conventional wisdom that even though national crime rates have continued to decline, the way the Harris campaign appeared not to deal seriously with concerns about crime in November was damaging to the Harris campaign. I'm curious on those two, for example, or others that you want to bring up, Do you think that there are some of these common themes about what should and shouldn't be center stage for national Democratic campaigns if the goal is to win?
I think when it comes to something like guns, I obviously understand in a state like Wyoming, for example, it's going to be harder for us to get, common sense gun laws passed. But I want to break our party out of this sense of complacency where we say, well, we're in a state that's very red, for example, or there's conservative voters out there. We just can't do anything about this. That's not true. There are a lot of things, especially around funding, that we can focus on that can help reduce gun violence. And we've done in a bipartisan manner. In 2023, we passed the first federal gun law in 30 years. And guess what? We passed it in a bipartisan way. It was called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It was passed after Uvalde, and it expanded background checks for people under the age of 21 to buy guns. It's resulted in over 1,000 high-risk individuals from being able to purchase guns like the AR-15 that previously would not have been.
Hmm.
And it also put billions of dollars into school safety and mental health programs. It also put billions of dollars into community safety programs to stop people from wanting to pick up a gun to kill each other in the first place. Those are common sense things that we can do, and we've seen double-digit reductions in gun homicides since the passage of that law. So what I would say is let's take a more nuanced approach to it. Let's not say, well, I understand in some districts it's going to be harder to talk about firearms or firearm regulation than it is in others. But we can still talk about what are we doing to address gun suicide, to fund more mental health programs to address that, because that's 2/3 of gun deaths. And those are deaths of despair, right? What can we do to ensure that we're funding jobs programs and more so that young people don't feel the need to pick up a gun in the first place and use it against somebody else, even if we aren't able to do something around the law specifically? But when we have that power, I want to make sure that we actually use it and deliver on it. The same way we did with the Affordable Care Act. Yes. Did we get killed in midterms after the Affordable Care Act? Definitely. But it has become enormously popular, and it has helped millions of people, including my own family, right? My father didn't get kicked off of his health insurance after he got diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease because of the Affordable Care Act, right?
Right.
There are so many essential things that we did with that. And did we pay a cost for it? Yes. But guess what? As Democrats, we gain our political capital to use it to help the American people, even if it means in the short term that we pay a political price for that. Because I don't think there's anybody out there that, or at least very few people I know, that would argue that passing ACA was a bad thing because it resulted in the 2010 midterms, for example.
All right. We've been speaking with David Hogg, elected as a vice chair of the DNC, also co-founder of Leaders We Deserve. David, thanks for telling us what you're up to. We're going to be following it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, David.